Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. So recently I made a post on my Instagram about how I use modulation to create movement in my tracks. I mean, house music is essentially loopy and boring. I mean, I don't think it's boring, but you know, it's repetitive. But what I showed in this post is how I use like simple effects that change over an unsynchronized period of time to create movement and interest in my tracks. It keeps things turning over and sounding fresh and gives the listener the subconscious impression that things are changing and evolving. If you like the track that's playing, it's a new one of mine. There's a link in the description to Beatport and Spotify if you want to go and grab that. Much appreciated. And as always, you can grab the project files for this video from the link in the description, which goes to Patreon. It's one of the best ways you can support the channel and make sure I bring you these videos consistently every week. Now let's jump into Ableton and do some modulation. Alright, so here we are inside Ableton and I've put together a little deep house beat, you know how we do. So let's take a quick listen. So I've put in this vocal because I like vocals, but without it, it's very repetitive. I think it's like looping over pretty much one bar or something. So I'm going to show you some techniques about how to take something like this and just add in some organic movement that's not happening over a regular bar length, like 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars, 8 bars, 16, something like that. You know, so basically we're going to create something that's a little bit out of sync, but works with the rest of the track. That's going to create kind of randomized movement. So the first thing I want to do is basically what I showed on Instagram. If I make a MIDI track here, we've just got an instance of Diva. Cool, so I can put in some MIDI and I'm just going to make a kind of dotted pattern. So we're playing on the 1, missing 2, playing there, like this kind of thing. Kind of like a polyrhythm or polymeter. Very common rhythm in house and techno music. So that's already working to kind of create a bit of interest with the groove. We could also even make it so it's in irregular bar length. So now it's looping outside of the 1 bar loop of the rest of the elements. Now what I showed on Instagram was using a plugin called EFX Refract from Arturia. This is a really cool plugin. I believe I got it for free during some promotion. It's currently now not free, but that's a good reason to subscribe to some of these plugin manufacturers. But I know some companies like Arturia or Soundtoys, for example, often have like giveaways or heavily discounted promotions. So just keeping an eye on those things because you can get stuff free or really, really cheap. This is like a multi-effects plugin, but not a super complicated one. And these modules inside of it are pretty like standard effects. So we've got a refraction here, which is like a chorus essentially, and a bandpass, which is just a bandpass filter. The combination of them together gives this effect to our synth. So from a sound design perspective, it sounds cool. And from a modulation perspective, it's moving unsynced, right? So it creates this element that's ever changing in relation to the other elements in the track. Really cool. Like I said, you could use an auto filter and a phaser or something like that, or a chorus from Ableton to recreate something similar. But the point is like getting it unsynced and moving. Without that, so it just feels so much less rigid. All right, the next example I'm going to do is with some hats. So I've got a couple of hats here pre-prepared. We've got our 16th hat. Loop from Underground Shades of House, Volume 2, coming soon. Link up here to Volume 1. Okay, so I've basically just recreated this 16th hat in MIDI and put a vocoder on with a noise carrier. So without the noise carrier, with it, gives it a bit more texture and extends out the sample a little bit. So this one is super simple. All we're going to do is add a flanger. So we're going to use basically like our main 16th hat as the driving rhythmic element in the track, and then this is going to add some interesting texture underneath. So if I change this to flanger, turn up the feedback, then now listen to this. I'll set this rate to hertz and make it a bit slower. Okay, so that sounds pretty cool. So we're now getting some movement in the panorama and also that flanging sound, right? So it sounds pretty cool. But there's something else that we can do to add even more movement, which is to add a modulator, the LFO. We're going to map that to the feedback. I'm going to change this waveform to stray. So that basically... Okay, let me just bring this down a little bit so it's not so full on. We'll bring the depth down, offset it a little bit forward. So now it's going to basically stay roughly where it is, and then sometimes it's going to shoot up. So it's basically just happening a lot less regularly without... So now we've got this element that's really got all this kind of movement and creating tension underneath. So let's listen to it in context with the track, without, and then I'll bring it in. So a really cool, very organic sounding element there. Super easy, and it doesn't take away anything from our original beat. It really is just adding movement. Another example, pretty similar. So I've got this same kind of hat loop. It's quite similar, but a different alternative to this one that I've done with the Diva and the EFX Refract. And this will show you how you can use some of the Ableton devices as well. So let's throw on a vocoder. Now the MIDI looks like this. It's basically doing this kind of similar polyrhythmic pattern. So with the beat would be like this. It sounds all right, actually kind of taking away from the groove a little bit in my opinion. But what we'll do is add on a bandpass. We'll use auto filter, set it to bandpass, a bit more resonance. So anyone who's been into kind of deep minimal house over the last few years will probably hear something that they recognize here. So there we've just turned up the LFO, and now this filter is essentially moving like this. Unfortunately, Ableton haven't updated the auto filter to show movement yet, but that's essentially what's happening. We can change it to random, but it probably sounds better with the sine wave, to be honest. We can add in some of this phase or some spin. Maybe increase the rate. And let's add in a delay, and I'll change this to ping pong. And I might actually put this kickstart afterwards. So now we've got this element again that can sit underneath and create movement. So without. Very nice. We could also do it with a different MIDI pattern. We could do it with this more straight 16th pattern like this. but because of the rhythm being very straight, it kind of doesn't have the same dissonance and movement, but both could work depending on your track. Okay, so the next idea is super simple. I've got this plugin which is free from Baby Audio called Pitch Drift. We have a string here. I'll just turn Pitch Drift off, solo the string. Let's open that up a little bit. Yep, standard held string. It's got a bit of chorus on it to add a little bit of movement already. So it adds a little bit of movement and a little bit of width, but it's still very linear. So now Pitch Drift basically does exactly what it says on the tin. It just shifts the pitch over time. So we can control the speed on this main window here, up and down, and we can control the amount of pitch shifting. So let's add some extreme pitch shifting and listen to it. Okay, so let's add some extreme settings and give it a listen. Amount 100, and then let's play with the speed. I think more subtle settings are generally more user-friendly. To be honest, a lot of the time I just put it on as the default, which is 50-50. And this one's going to be much more subtle. It's going to be kind of harder to hear in context, but all of these little things do add up to make things sound a bit more humanized. Really cool. With the flanger as well. And with the diva. And with the vocal. So you kind of want these things to be subtle, especially when there's a lot of them together. It can really add up quite quickly to be a bit too much. But if you have these elements kind of moving over different cycles, different speeds, different amounts, and modulating different things, then you can really get a lot of movement over the top of a pretty simple beat. As always, this project file is available to download from Patreon. There's a link in the description to go and get that. There's this project file and so many more there. And as there's a few third-party plugins on here, I'll freeze those tracks so it's available for everyone. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. Really simple, but really effective. The techniques are subtle, as they should be, but they really do go a long way to making your tracks more interesting over time. If you're looking for something to watch next, then check out this video. The YouTube algorithm seems to think you're going to like it. Well, that's it from me today. We'll catch you next time. Peace!